Rajasthan. You know, when you hear that name, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's these grand images, right? Magnificent forts, legendary warriors, and unbelievable stories of bravery. That's the history we all grew up with. Yeah, it's this powerful narrative of glory, of honor, of sacrifice. And it's been passed down from one generation to the next. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the reality is a lot more complex? In this explainer, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to peel back some of those layers. We'll look at some of the tougher, more documented parts of Rajasthan's history. And the goal here isn't to be sensational. It's to understand the full picture, based strictly on what historical records tell us. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the practice of Jauhar, and we'll ask, was it truly about honor or was it a tragedy? Then we're going to dive into the politics of the throne, the internal betrayals. After that, we'll try to separate fact from folklore when it comes to Rajasthan's famous forts. We'll also take a really logical look at the whole Bhangarh mystery. And finally, we'll wrap up by talking about what all of this can teach us. All right, let's start with what is probably one of the most debated and, frankly, one of the most painful subjects in the history of Rajasthan, the practice of Jauhar. So, to understand Jauhar, you have to place yourself in medieval Rajput society. When defeat in a battle seemed absolutely certain, the idea of honor was everything. To avoid being captured, enslaved, or facing what they consider the ultimate dishonor from their enemies, the women of the royal household would perform a mass self-immolation. And this is the practice that came to be known as Jauhar. And this leads us to a really difficult question, one that historians still debate even today. Was Jauhar a conscious choice? An act by brave women to protect their own dignity? Or was it a tragic result of immense social pressure? A situation where maybe no other option was even considered possible?
Well, the debate really splits into two main viewpoints. The first one, which tries to see it from the context of that time, views it as the ultimate act of honor, a final defiant sacrifice to protect their dignity. But then there's another perspective, especially when we look at it with our modern understanding. This view sees it as a deep, profound human tragedy, something that happened because of a patriarchal society that really left women with no other way out.
Now, it's easy to think that the biggest threats to the Rajput kingdoms came from the outside, from invaders. But the truth is, they were often weakened just as much, if not more, from the inside. The fight for power. It was a brutal game. We see it in the historical records over and over again. For a chance to sit on the throne, brother would turn against brother. Entire families were torn apart by ambition. And these betrayals, they didn't just break families, they weakened whole kingdoms from the core. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. It was a pattern, a cycle of internal conflict that just kept repeating. If you look across different kingdoms, across different centuries, you find documented cases of it all. Heirs being poisoned, political rivals locked away for life, all just to clear the path to the throne. So, you see, while our history books tend to focus on the big battles against foreign invaders, it's so important to get this. These internal threats, the constant fights over who's next in line, the poisonings, the political divisions, they were often just as destructive. In some cases, maybe even more so, to the stability of these kingdoms in the long run. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something else Rajasthan is famous for, those incredible, magnificent forts. We look at them today and see symbols of pure strength and grandeur. But hidden within their ancient walls are stories that really blur the line between actual history and pure myth. I'm sure many of you have heard the stories, right? That to make sure the foundations of these forts were strong, human sacrifices were made. It's a very common, and let's be honest, a very dramatic story. But this is exactly where we need to stop and think critically. Are these stories based on actual documented historical facts? Or are they folklore, stories that have just gotten bigger and more dramatic as they've been told and retold over generations? The thing is, when you actually look for the proof, direct historical evidence for these kinds of sacrifices is extremely rare, almost non-existent really. Now the legends are powerful for sure, but for the most part, that's what they are, legends that have been amplified over hundreds of years. So it's absolutely crucial to separate the compelling folklore from the verifiable history. And this leads us perfectly into a fantastic case study of how these myths get built. Bhangarh Fort. You've probably heard of it. It's widely called India's most haunted place. So what is the real story behind this haunted label? Well, here's the key fact. The Archaeological Survey of India, the ASI, prohibits entry to all of its protected monuments across the entire country after sunset. This isn't some special rule for Bhangarh because it's haunted. It's just a standard safety and security rule for everywhere. This is textbook myth-making right here. You take a completely logical, practical safety rule, then you layer it on top of all the local legends that already exist. Stories about curses and spirits. And before you know it, that simple rule is seen as proof that the place is haunted. A simple safety measure gets twisted into a haunted ban in everyone's mind. Now look, this doesn't mean that the creepy feeling people get there isn't real. It absolutely is. Our minds are just powerfully affected by certain things: darkness, total silence, being in abandoned ruins. So while the cause is most likely psychological, not paranormal, that feeling of unease, that's a very, very real human experience. So, after looking at all these different things, Jauhar, the internal politics, the myths around the forts, we come to the most important question of all. How should we look at our own history? At the end of the day, the purpose of history isn't just about celebrating the good parts, it's about understanding the whole thing. It's so easy for us sitting here today to judge the past, but real learning, that comes from trying to understand why people made the choices they made within the world they lived in. And if there's one big takeaway from the more complex side of Rajasthan's history, it's this. You see just how dangerous the combination of power, honor, and fear can be. Our history only becomes a useful guide for the future when we have the courage to actually question it, not just blindly celebrate it. So I want to leave you with the same question we started this whole discussion with, for you to really think about. A practice like Jauhar, was it the ultimate act of honor, or was it a tragic compulsion, a product of its time? I genuinely love to know what you think. Let's have a thoughtful discussion about it in the comments below.